Good afternoon, everybody. It's my honor to introduce Steve Nygren. Steve is the founder of the Serenbe development in the Atlanta area. And this is an opportunity that we took a few years ago as part of a Vision City visit to see this development. And it really connected with a lot of what the city was thinking about and the desire to look at how we look at our undeveloped areas and ways and strategies to protect rural character, but also have great, positive, impactful development. And so that really captured folks' minds and imagination. And that ultimately translated into a component of our updated land use plan, the Village Green concept. And so Steve's going to speak about that and talk about the vision that led to preserving 70% of the land in a 40,000 acre development area, and how it really honored and looked at the character of the land and integrating development into that land. Like listening to the land as you do the development is one of the things that really kind of stood out as Steve talked about it and as we witnessed that development firsthand. So Steve comes to this after a highly successful career in the hospitality industry. He has had an amazing second chapter working in development and thinking in a different way about how you make development work and honor the character of the land and protect rural character and build a wonderful community. So we're honored to have Steve with us. Steve took time to be with us last night and spent time with our planning commissioners, our board of mayor and aldermen, and historic zoning commissioners. So we really want to thank him for his generosity of time and giving us some time with those groups that play such an important role in our community, and look forward to hearing his presentation today. So join me in welcoming Steve Nygren.
Well, this is a real honor to be with you all. It was great when your group came down and visited Serenbe and started studying Serenbe. But now that I visit Franklin, man, you've got a lot going on here. When I found out I was going to be a developer, we studied old frames of the old towns from 100 years ago, and my goodness, you have that. That framework that so many people envy, and then to have the historic, passionate people making sure you keep that, that's incredible. And then, of course, great being here with Seaside, and we started going to Seaside when there were just two streets when our kids were small in the 80s. And again, when I found out I was going to be a developer, Robert Davis is one of the first people I sat down with, and Robert gave me the advice of having one HOA. And so our CCRs, we just keep expanding, and so we have the HOA until we stop. So, if we keep adding area, we keep that HOA. So we had the pleasure of, understanding from a lot of folks the do's and don'ts to that whole thing. Okay, let's see if I can make sure that this advances and works okay. So it was amazing. So here are the questions that I was asked to address. There's so many things we could address, but to talk about our zoning, the land plan, our pedestrian connections, integrated green space, connections between nature and health, and then our diverse housing. So we're going to kind of run through those. Those are some of the things that maybe differentiate us from some developments, and maybe some of the things that are a little different than what you've been doing here. So this is the whole path. As I was a retired hospitality person, and we moved to our weekend farm, which is just 32 miles southwest of Atlanta. It's the area that had been forgotten. And we kind of had the opposite. That this was an area that had nothing going on, and we had to figure out, as development was coming our way, it was going to be not very high value. Kind of the opposite that you all have. You have, pressure from millionaires trying to take over the place, from what I understand it. So it's the same kind of pressure, but they're very different. So what did we do? When that pressure started, I had, the old farm was 300 acres. And the first thing I did was start calling neighbors and buying more land. You don't want to own anything, it's just what protects you. And at the 900 acres, I realized that really didn't protect me. And so what were we going to do? And we looked at doing a model. But then I saw what happened to Seaside. You know, they actually destroyed the area around them, not intentionally, but their success didn't turn out so well for the area. Prairie Crossing outside Chicago was the same thing. And so we realized that we needed to look at a larger area. And there was 40,000 acres in the southern tip of Fulton County that was still agriculture. Now, if you know, Fulton County is 80 miles long with Atlanta right in the middle of it, so you have North County and South County. All the development has gone north and in the 17th county area. So we began by calling a couple of the large landowners over for dinner. Several cases of wine later, they said, maybe we have something. Then, you know, in 2000, I was just learning how to use Excel, and the county had just put all the tax records on Excel, so I was able to sort that and figure out who owned 50% of the 40,000 acres, because large landowners are going to kind of dictate what happens, or at least try to. And it turned out there were only 36 of us. And so we called a meeting of those 36 and tried to bring some reason. You know, I had this great vision that the two large landowners went along with. Well, it was a mixed group. I'm sure some of the same groups you deal with, and the inherited landowners were really divided. Half wanted the bulldozers. They were waiting for the payday, bring them on, how fast. And the other half, don't you dare touch this. I want our grandkids to grow up in this same area. And then there were land speculators, and then people like us who had found this rural paradise so close to the city. So we had to change the conversation, and we started looking at it's not pro-development, it's pro-value. And it's quality of life rather than preservation. And so as we started on the conversation, how could we bring those two things together? And to the pro-value, we looked at why we had so many golf courses in the 70s and 80s. It was because the bankers loved the value they were bringing, and so everybody kept building golf courses. And so what if we could get that same value by just saving the land? And to the preservation folks, there was no way that any of the preservation community was going to come down and help us. They were all in front of the bulldozers up north. There was no way we were going to save more than 15% of land. So that group, I said, would you support development if we could save maybe 30-40%? Oh yeah, let's do it. So as you see the pictures there, we started out with coffees, and that moved to public meetings that ended up being so large that we had to move to the local gym in the school. We had so inspired a community to join in the conversation of what their future might be. What we came up with is we looked at the old way, just looking at 17 county area in metro Atlanta. If we just applied that math to the 40,000 acres, we were about to disturb 80% of the land. Some of the pressure that you're dealing with around Franklin, why we've been invited here. And there was about 30,000 houses. We came as a community to disturb only 30% of the land. And we will put 20% more housing in because of the density. Now, someone mentioned, you now understand density with West Haven coming in, that the density can be high value. But generally, there's been a tendency that that's not so. Now, what's more important is the model on the right. The infrastructure is about 40% to both install and maintain than the traditional way of just spreading everything out. Another important thing is the traditional is very auto-dependent, where this is walkable. And you were talking about Seaside and Franklin and the problem of parking. No, the problem is the cars. You know, the automobile and the way our system uses it is one of the most unsustainable. And you look at all the graphs, this program is going to change once there's enough alternatives, and the alternatives of shared transportation and what have you are coming along. So if you're not dealing with walkable communities and how that works, there's going to be, it's going to be an old model in the future. And so that's one of the big things that you can talk about. So Serenbe, once we started developing Serenbe and understanding what we were doing, as I mentioned, we looked at historic towns, and the countryside of England was a real model. During my 7 years of retirement, we spent like a month there. We had a dear friend who lived in a little town southwest of London called Selborne. And we learned about land laws and the paths and walking to the pub and the food store and what have you. And so that was the model that we wanted to bring through. And we, of course, all the professional planners this 20 years ago thought everything I was doing was nuts. Seaside and new urbanism was kind of the new thing, but not many people were doing this. And so we were looking for someone that was thoughtful, and Rocky Mountain Institute had helped us in because of a relationship there with Ray Anderson, the great environmentalist. And so they introduced me to Phil Tabb, who did his doctorate on the English village system. And he was then head of architecture at Texas A&M. And so Phil came initially to consult with us and became our official land planner, and has remained that until today. When he retired from Texas A&M, he moved to Serenbe. But I decided there were 4 key principles that places that I had studied through civilization. And so we wanted to put those 4 pillars in. One was agriculture, and we put a farm right next to the housing, something you didn't do 20 years ago. You need to know who was growing your food. I grew up on a generational farm. And that has resulted in a lot of national organizations coming to visit us due to a story in the New York Times. She tagged it, and agrihood and a movement was born. And so as the various organizations came, I realized they didn't know one another. We had what I called the 24-hour dinner party, and that's resulted in the Rodale Institute has now located their Southeast Research Center on my neighbor's land to the north. The Conservation Fund launched their farm program, which is saving farmland in urban area and then putting people who may not have a path to ownership, people of color, vets and women, into a ownership position. We saved the 1,000th acre in Georgia, just a mile from Serenbe. And then the National Farmland Trust came. They have now people working in the southeast out of Serenbe. I'm not able to stay tomorrow because I'm jumping on a plane early in the morning to head out to their meeting at Ted Turner's ranch out in New Mexico. So it's been fun bringing all these national organizations. So this has become a think tank of that. Art was an important. Great patrons have been through time, and so we've formed the Serenbe nonprofit with a 1% transfer fee on every house or 3% on a vacant lot, and we put over $1 million every year into art programming for the community. Now this is open to everyone, but we bring people in from all over the nation. Plus we have an artist in residence program. Health, we're doing a lot on health, especially as we bring intergenerational and aging in place as the baby boomers are heading into elderhood. We're building places that I don't want to live. I call them cruise ships to death. And so I think that's going to be a real change. And then education, and we've gone from an educational desert to doing all sorts of things. But as we started developing, everybody thought it was crazy. And then out of the recession, there was a lot of studies that showed that walkable and environmental communities were the first to come out. So suddenly people started showing up. But they would, we were listed as there's a hard book from Urban Land Institute on the 10 top environmental communities in the nation. A lot of them, like Braves Island, some of the great none of them had density. So people would arrive and say, well, this isn't environment. Well, we're that huge environmental, but, and then, of course, one of the new urbanists, as that was coming in, saw our density, and so people would call us a new urbanist. And then because of the farm, we were agrihood. So we said, well, who are we? How describe ourselves so people are not surprised? Realized some of the early, I'd heard Yale was talking about biophilic design. I was on a conference with Tim Beatley at UVA. Bill Browning had talked about in one of our early charrettes, and I said, oh my gosh, biophilic design. Now, 12, 14 years ago, nobody could spell it. A lot of people still can't. But you're starting to see biophilic design show up, especially in a lot of architectural and interior design. It's really a love of all living systems. And so that really described what we were doing. That includes the agriculture, the environment, and the density, because when we live in dense communities, we connect to one another. And if there's nature, we connect to nature easily, and that's what we're about. And all the studies coming out post-pandemic show that part of our mental attitude is based on how we connect with nature and with each other. And we've been creating places that separate us from both for the last several decades. And we wonder why we have more depression than we've ever had, and why antidepressants continue to increase every decade. The built environment, I think, is one of the big issues as to how we've built, and so that's one of the things we're addressing. This is the various silos that we found with biophilic design, and through regulations, fear, various policies, we operate in silos with blinders on, and do not realize the unintended consequences that many of our decisions make. This afternoon I'm going to talk about land use and community engagement, but you can see there are many silos that all interact, and that's what we're dealing with. And if this more integrates, you're going to come in with personal well-being, community engagement, national security, and global balance. National security is a whole tale I could tell you about why I've added that. Puck Muckleby, when he had retired from the Pentagon, came to Serenbe as one of our scholars in residence. In fact, Phyllis Blywise was the one. Phyllis, who was the executive director of Seaside Institute, I think when they first came here probably, when she retired, she moved to Serenbe about 13 years ago. So Phyllis got Puck to come, and he was writing his book, The Grand Strategy, when he was called in by Admiral Mullins and asked to look at the threats to the United States. Now this is 15, 17 years ago. 2 years later, they said the threat was not exterior, the threat was interior. If we did not deal with personal responsibility, a sense of community, education, we were going to rot from the interior. And that report was finally published by the Woodrow Wilson Institute, and their recommendation was the National Defense Act of 1947 be changed to the National Prosperity and Defense Act. It's somewhere in committee. This is what Serenbe looks like from the air. You can see the wandering streets as we relate to nature. I asked our civil engineers to pretend we didn't have bulldozers, and how could we integrate with nature and with the land, that we didn't have a pattern we were trying to apply. Rather, we walked the land and tried to understand where the best places to put development and where we could leave the natural land and landscape. You'll see the farm right there. And on the red, let's see, the red is our street grid, but on the right is our pedestrian. The dark blue are our soft surface paths, and the light blue are our sidewalks or asphalt paths. So you can see look at all the cross. And so if you're going someplace, it's a lot shorter to cross through nature to the other side. So we really have folks walking everywhere. We don't put mail sheds or not your front porch or at that box out at the end of the sidewalk. You walk to get your mail. You walk to get everything. One of the big things, one lady stopped me after she'd lived there about 6 months and said, you know, I gave up diets 10 years ago because I was on them for 20 years and they didn't seem to work. So I figured I was going to stop worrying about what I ate and just enjoy it. But she says, after living here about 6 months, I borrowed somebody's scale because my clothes were all getting loose. And I've lost 15 pounds without even thinking about it. Well, it's because you walk everywhere. It's a lot more convenient to walk everywhere. We have not built the community for the automobiles. Automobiles are going to continue to be a problem, and where they park if we keep building places for them. You know, let's build places for the individuals. And I think that's one of the big things, opportunities that Franklin has. Because of our density, we pull the porches up close. Not unlike your historic district where it is here. And so that's one of the big changes you'll see. We have pocket gathering places, and I think this is one of the things I was asked to really talk about is how can you integrate these places, and this is in your existing or in your green field. How are you going to make places for people to gather? And you see this is all integrated right within the community. This is something that's next door, down the street, or what have you. And this shows you one of the developed areas right in the middle of Serenbe. And here's your main street with an integrated second street, lower street. But we have a pedestrian path all the way through. In fact, there's pedestrian paths. You can see some of these pedestrian paths, so you can reach every house by a private path or sidewalk. And so this is why we have kids running all over the place. The parents feel free that they're running around. But you can see here the various uses from this area down here, which this picture was taken in the middle of COVID. We didn't stop a thing. We just we had plenty of outside spaces, so people would continue with their coffee parties or their cocktail parties, the yoga parties. It was all outside. In fact, we were more vital because everything was happening outside the front porch as they were walking and talking. But as you come up here, here you can see you have spaces. That's a neighborhood party. I could show you pictures of that when that party isn't going on. It's full of kids' play tools. I mean, it's just there's kids in that area all the time. And then the big European courtyard. And then this is 16 cottages down here that are on a medicinal garden with their front doors on. So there is one long walkway, and look at there's 4 separate spaces that are all used, and you can walk to it. And so this is an opportunity that I see many cities redoing this. I just got back from Ontario, and they're doing Ontario Care, and they're tearing up some streets, some buildings they're tearing down to put passages through and between. So this is an opportunity no matter how old your city is. Now, the area that I just showed you to give you an idea is up there at the top. So this shows you sort of how it's integrated. Then this is down a little further, and this is 7 acres that we're getting ready to put our Aging in Place campus in. But notice how integrated it is. It's not going to be separate. We're putting also, this is the commercial area down here, and that is, there is a corridor through that building, and that we're maintaining that on all the buildings in this campus. And you'll be able to see all the way down to this path, and there's usually a horse trail. That's one of our horse trail paths. So you can see that whole campus, and even from the medical building, you can see horses going by the stream. So that's integrating nature all the time with what's happening And you can see where, it's across from the swim club, across from the school. That school campus is for 450 kids. We have two of the buildings built. So we're integrating the bookends of society that have been separated in a lot of the ways that we're develop our senior housing, our schools. We sort of put them in fenced courtyards that are more like prisons. I think the pandemic showed how inhumane that system has been, both for our kids and our seniors. So this is all about integrating where we live and how we live. This shows you within the 20 acres all the things going on. So that's all very walkable, from hospitality to health services to the school and the vitality that happens. And we don't have the households that can support all this. And this is the real difference between, on your outer belt, are you going to have housing community, or are you going to have placemaking? And placemaking is places that you want to go for services or recreation or just to be, versus shelter. And we've been building places on the edge for shelter, but that's all a vehicular oriented path. This is that very street that I was showing you. So here's a great coffee shop that's open. This is all probably new since Franklin visited. This is the whole street there that's brand new. And then the ice cream shop out of Seaside. Their only other location is Seaside, so there are second locations at Serenbe. We have a lot of relationships between Seaside and Serenbe. That's the health restaurant, the martial arts center. There's also a bagel shop at the other end, the Bamboo Juice. So we have about 12 hospitality places where you can meet up for some sort of food and conversation, always with tables outside and what have you. Also notice the mix of architecture, which I'll also show. Multi-generational. When you're walking to your mail, when you're walking to your coffee, you just mix the generations. The common thing is it takes 2 hours to get your mail at Serenbe. Here you show in the thank goodness, in my restaurant days, I believed in Midtown Atlanta back in the day. Those that know Midland, I started buying land there in the 70s when it was dirt cheap. That's what I've sold and leveraged to build. So we were working with Mayo Clinic, and I needed to build a building. We built a 2,300 square foot building. I couldn't get an investor. I couldn't even get a bank to loan me money other than about 30%. It's totally filled now with health professionals, from your dentist to your Chinese medicine to the pediatrician to the doctors, everything you want to see. And so it's a complete mix of health professionals right there. And then that spawned 16 LiveWorks. You all know the LiveWork. I mean, that's where you have the commercial on the street, and we have 2 apartments above most of ours. So these are all independently owned, and they've all started businesses in all those lower levels, and a good percent of them are health providers, which is right there. People coming out of retirement, or not necessarily out of retirement, people that stepped away. The one who has the Pilates studio, her kids were going off to college, and so I'm going to go back and use my degree. And another family, they came to visit, and they thought they were moving to New York when the kids went to college. They'd been in Philadelphia 20 years. They moved there and all of a sudden created a business on health and wellness. So it's all kinds of stories on all those that's there. And then growing your food, as I mentioned, we put the farm. So man, what a social place the farm is. I mean, all of our kids and adults know seasonality. They know the farmer. It's great fun. And not just in the farm, but all of our crosswalks are blueberry bushes. And the kids know that when the service berries start blooming, now service berries have disappeared because they don't have shelf life. Most people don't know what a service berry is, but the kids know when the service berries start, next is going to be the blueberries. After the blueberries comes the figs. After the figs come the apples. After the apples come the nuts. And so they understand that whole seasonality. This is where education happens, in the community, not just in the 4 rooms of the classroom. We're expecting our teachers to teach our kids. Most of the education comes in the community, and we've lost that. Nature within steps. You can see how we connect to nature. Because of that land plan, that density, we have the high density. How many people enjoy mowing your lawn on Saturdays and taking care of your yard, right? Not many. What's more, did you notice our yards have no grass? That means also no chemicals. That also means no noise from lawnmowers and blowers. All these things that affect our quality of life. We have over 300 kids at Serenbe. Not one reported a sign of asthma. Statistically impossible in the United States. We have seniors who have moved there because of the air quality. I think it's because we're not chemicalizing our front yards. Yeah, we can't keep doing what we've been doing and then continue to ask why we're sicker and more depressed. Yeah, we're doing something that's causing that, right? Why aren't we changing it? Why aren't we asking those questions? I think what we're doing there in not having chemicals is a good example, and you just look at the health benefits that's happening. Can you see all the houses? This nature, look at all the houses. They're right in the middle of both nature and density. And so that's the huge opportunity you have. How are you going to connect your developed area to your natural areas and keep some of the areas natural, but yet it's not an either or if you can bring everybody together. It is an and that's the challenge, to have that conversation and then create the plan that creates that. But it's not just at Serenbe. So here you see where Serenbe is. This is our 40,000-acre community, and there are 98 miles of trails either in or being developed that connect to our 20 miles within our personal development. And so it's a huge connectivity, which is something I think also you all have an opportunity. You have some great paths, you have some great parks. How connected are they? And then here, we're part of the initiative that brought this forward with Trust for Public Land, and we're connecting to a 100-mile trail now being developed along the Chattahoochee that will take us right into Atlanta and the Beltline. So it's, the huge thing is for tomorrow. What are the young people going to want tomorrow? And it is more walkable, more connection to nature. We're hearing nature forward more and more. And so we've got to start bringing the young people in to understand. The baby boomers have been used to being in charge for a long time. And so it's great to see, like Micah stepping in. My 3 daughters have all come home with their northern husbands. And it's that next generation that has to start taking the lead. And we have to understand what they want. This is where Serenbe is in that whole 100-mile piece. Free-range kids and uncaged elders, that's what we're really working on there. And we're doing a lot of things, and you come to the streets and you see that, you feel it. And what amazes me is how many people comment on it. So it must be pretty unusual that we're seeing this happening. You see, 8-year-olds riding bicycles and you don't see where the parents are. All kinds of experience that probably, there's a lot of gray hairs in this room. You probably all grew up that way. But chances are a few of your grandkids are. And there's no reason that we have to be building places that cannot have that better quality of life. Oh, yeah, and did you notice that center line there? Well, I just jumped way ahead, didn't I? So now the other subject I wanted to talk about is streets and density and what have you. So creating a streetscape, and probably one thing that I really studied developments versus towns, like Franklin, towns in Europe that were built over centuries versus over decades. And I wanted to build a town versus a development. And what was that difference? And a lot of it is the mix of architecture and the mix of sizes of houses that just happen on places that happen over a period of time. And so that's one thing I think we've mastered. In each area, we have a basis. In the first two communities, you'll see it's a southern vernacular. But here in Motto, where this picture is, I used Scandinavian architecture. Went to Sweden, came down through the countryside and into Malmo, because a lot of the things we're doing on programming, on health and wellness, were coming out of Scandinavia. So why not reflect the architecture and to give it some interest in something different. Here is the Thornburg transect that Phil Tabb brought back from England in how we organize the kind of housing we have, so that we're coming in about a half a mile area from the very rural to coming into the very urban area. And this is one of the big things that through our design review board, we have coffees to remind everybody. Just because you have a clipped hedge in front of this townhouse doesn't mean that out in the more rural district you can have that same thing. It's looser. So within a half mile, we have a lot of different rules as far as architecture and landscaping. And it's what gives it that interest as you move through it. People don't understand what that is, but there is, those of you who have been there know how naturally you flow, and all of a sudden you're back at a 4-story building, and you've just come from very simple, and it's this adherence to the transect as we're doing it. Here this shows you how it applies to our Selborne area as we make all those decisions on the houses, the landscaping, setbacks, and what have you. The mix of architecture is another key thing. Here, you know, what a variety of architecture that really makes it more interesting. I think, you know, you can have great architecture, but if everything is great and similar, you know, we see some of the design review board books and regulations, and oh my goodness, it's so thick. Ours is fairly small. We really focus on where the front of the house is from the curb, and for every house, we establish where that is. It can be this or that. This is where the front of the house goes. And then the height of the house, we establish that. You know, if you go down a street and it's doing like this, it's not, you know, it's like a beautiful woman smiling and she has a bunch of broken teeth. You know, when it's going up and down, it just, and you're quite not sure what it is that doesn't work, but it just isn't a same. So this gives a lot of interest, and it all fits. People see this, they, how does this all fit together in the same community? But you come and you visit and you see that it does. Here's one location, 4 very distinct architectural styles next door and right across from each other. And when you're on the street, it just seems very, very natural. The very tall 4-story houses are on the upper hill, and the lower are sitting down next to the lake, across the street, though. And so this really works from the street. Now, if you were to look at the academic books, there's no way this should work. Yet you look at any town that's built over centuries, you see these kind of conditions that happen. Here you show the sizes and massing. This happened, we had the land plan, and then I had 5 quarter-acre lots right here, but we weren't selling much in the recession. And so I took 5 of those and turned it into 15 lots and offered a complete house for $265,000 that was all geothermal and solar. And we started walking out of the recession in 2010 because of those small lots. But when you're on the street, this looks very, very natural, that you have a house that's about 5,500 square feet, next to one that's about 2,300 square feet, next to these that are 900 and 1,100 square feet. This also mixes neighbors. They're not all segregated down that street. It isn't all the millionaires are down on X Street and everybody's small. Nobody kind of thinks about it. Just because you give your address doesn't mean, oh, you are so-and-so. It doesn't automatically categorize you. And density. I mean, we are really working on density and the varieties. Now, I didn't show this, but here you have one house on an acre of land. There's the school to give you an idea of proximity. This is the Aging in Place campus. Just across the pond, you see this, and here we're doing a staircase up a hillside with 17 units to an acre. That's dense. On a hillside that goes 110 feet up. And our inspiration was the Italian hill towns, but we put Scandinavian architecture on it. And so, you know, it's all these fun European experiences that you can get. But by the way, this is, I'm not talking about energy here, but that pond, well, there, see, I hit it. What did I do again here now? There we are. So that that pond was in the middle of our watershed. Now we were at the forefront of daylighted storm water back 20 years ago, in daylighting and bringing it all. In fact, I had to break federal law to actually do what was right because they hadn't gotten around to changing laws yet. Tell them they better not. I was calling the press. They didn't send an inspector for 7 years. Lesson there, if the rules aren't what you should do, stand up. If you've got the consultants behind you and if you know that you're doing. Too many times we just blindly keep doing the same old thing even though it's a problem for our environment or for our human health. Stop doing it. You got some gutsy people here, you know, I can tell you stand up to the rules and the regulations. That's what it's about. So anyhow, then he said, I'm going to have to put that stormwater right in the middle. I said, oh, that's going to be terrible. Look at what we've done. We've done all this in the bed. He said, look at your watershed. So I said, okay, well, we're going to make it beautiful. We ended up digging it 32 feet deep. It's the geothermal for that major office building plus all of the townhouses. I said, we'll make it beautiful. We hired artists to do the fence. That's turned a garden. And now I'm selling $1 million properties 5 feet from the edge of my stormwater pond. So several things, you know, turn positive things in. There's the street that had all those strange houses on it. I meant to have that up earlier. But as I mentioned, you know, what drives me to come share this with you or drives to share it with other things is I'm doing this for the grandkids. And of course, you know, my granddad always used an excuse to put his grandkids up on the screen. So all 7 are being raised on the streets of Serenbe, which is pretty cool. You know, and that's the way it used to be. That's the way I grew up, with that relationship with the older generations. And so that's what we have to do, but not only for them, but for their grandchildren. When I look at the decisions that my great-grandparents and their parents made, my life is better for that. And we certainly heard some of that earlier today about, you know, we have to look back and appreciate what our ancestors have done. But while we're doing that, remember, we are tomorrow's ancestors. And they're going to remember the decisions we make and how it affects their lives in the century ahead. I think as they just looking and what I've seen is the 2 big questions that I'm very curious about is what's your plan for pedestrians? When I looked at this whole 2.5 meeting, now maybe it's part of tomorrow, I see we're talking about cars, and I see we're talking about a lot of things, but I didn't see a whole agenda on the pedestrian. And I think that's one of the huge opportunities maybe you have. I'm curious about it. As we were walking to dinner last night and looking at the grass, I thought, man, wouldn't this street be a great park? Have you thought about turning Main Street into a pedestrian corridor? I hear you do it a few times a year, so you're testing it. Have you been to Boulder County, or Boulder, Colorado? Denver? Ontario? Everybody that's done it, everybody's happy, even though nobody. So, think about, I see heads are going both ways. I love this kind of conversation, This is when you really get into the meat of what planning is. And what's it going to be in the future? Do we always have to have a street for cars? I don't know. And what is the green space path? How does it all connect? You've got a lot of green space, but I'm not quite sure how it all connects to the existing paths and what have you. Maybe that exists, but I tried to find it, and I'd ask a couple people what your green space path connectivity is, and they always looked at and pointed to somebody else. Maybe they could tell me. So maybe it's there, but maybe I don't think you all know where it is if it is. Those are your two great opportunities, and it's all about the pedestrian. And I think that's where we're headed. So hopefully that's gives you some thoughts. And love that you all came to visit us. Come on back down. Thanks for inviting me up here. And I think you've got a great place, a great town, and now just keep it up.
Thank you. So as Eric said last night, Steve presented a more responsive approach to our Envision Franklin land use plan, the Village Green concept, and talked about Serenbe and some of those formats. But something that when we visited Serenbe on one of our Vision City trips, one of the things was seeing those accessory dwelling units and those mother-in-law uses to really blend people together. That was so exciting for us, and a concept that I think is kind of catching fire a little bit, or hopefully so here in Franklin as well. So that's good. We've got time for a couple questions. Anybody? I know somebody's got a question. Come on. Oh, yeah. Jonathan. Come on here. Hang on. Hang on.
I think it was a couple of years ago, I read an article about Serenbe, and one of the, so many positive things, one of the negatives might have been that it was the second home of many people who actually weren't there. So there are homes in the inventory that are owned, but the people are just there occasionally. Is that turned out to be a negative, or is there a solution for that? Or
Well, just plain isn't true. So, I love how the critics, somebody sends me a critics on what it is. Well, clearly they've not even been there, nor have they talked to anybody. 70% of our residents are primary. They've got their kids in school there, their lives are there. It isn't that. And even some of the secondary, because we're so close to Atlanta, a lot of their neighbors don't know that it's secondary. Because it's close enough that there's a dinner on Wednesday night, they show up for it. So, no, we don't, it isn't a fact even, so it doesn't factor in.
Any other questions? I think there was a question earlier about housing and affordable housing, and I think I was kind of raising that with the ADUs and the opportunity to have a broad spectrum of residents. So can you address that just a little more deeply too?
You bet. Love these questions, because it's always a presumption. So we landed in a 40,000 acre area that couldn't support itself. We don't need affordable housing. We need executive housing. And I think last night I showed people some of the example. 20 years ago, if your house caught fire, it was going to burn down. If you had a medical issue, you better get in the car and go because the ambulance wasn't coming. We couldn't support the basic services that we were supposedly getting. Now, the math, Serenbe, because we only disturbed 30%. Now, and 20 years ago, I mean, when we put this in, we basically stopped development because anybody that was thinking about development back then didn't understand what we were doing. And basically it stopped it for 20 years, you know, then the recession happened and then pandemic. But that's about to change. You're going to hear about, I think there's about 12,000 acres that is now in permit of some sort, so it's about to really change. But for 20 years it hasn't, because we have brought executive housing into an area that did not have that. Not only have we brought arts, a charter school, which I didn't mention, but we now have taxes at Serenbe having only disturbed 230 acres for taxable. That's about 1% of the city land. And we're now 65% of the taxes for full-time fire, full-time police, full-time public works. 10 years, we have rolled the millage rate back 3 times to keep affordable housing and farmland closer to the taxes they were at, even as their values escalate. Now stay tuned, because we're bringing about another 1,000 jobs in the next 6 years between the hotels and aging in place and various things. And so we've kind of used up our workforce housing in the country and Palmetto, our neighboring town 4 miles away, just under 3,000 people, 96% of the kids are on free or assisted lunch. We have workforce housing. It's to bring that other balance in. But I know that's going to change. But guess what? As we look at it, it's another broken system. It's all set up on the back of the taxpayers, and the only way people are able to do it today is through grants, and I don't feel that's sustainable. There's not one thing in Serenbe where we have used public funds, because that's not sustainable. It has to be at market. And so how do you do that? Now, haven't talked today. Last night I talked about transfer development rights and how you change what the values are, and you manipulated it a bunch of different ways. But, you know, as we started looking at, you know, some of the rules and regulations about affordable housing, no wonder we don't have much of it. We've got to change some of these. Now, everybody, you know, what I'm used to, everybody says, oh yeah, it's a problem. We're working with HUD. Are you familiar with Auburn University's Rural Studio program? And their first partnership was with us to show what real market was, and we set up the model. And now they're working with HUD on infill on workforce housing. Man, I'm right in the middle of workforce housing. Don't get me on another one of my soapboxes. You know, so much is broken about the systems we put in because we think we're protecting one thing, and it's just unintended consequences. So we're going to tackle that. There's a lot of rules and regulations we need to break down and change. So stay tuned.
Here, we got one more question, comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, can you provide some statistics about the agricultural production that's taking place at Serenbe?
Well, it depends on what kind of statistics you're talking about, but I mean that's another whole issue. Our farm is a teaching farm. And it is, you know, it's just the beginning of really more of a conversation than anything. So we're growing fruits and vegetables, and we're growing farmers. But more importantly, is we're becoming a think tank. Have you anyone seen the documentary out now, Common Ground? I mean, go see it, right? Oh my God. There's some of the issues. So, you know, Serenbe is a typical organic farm, but we're not going to change our food systems with the boutique farms that we have today. And so this is why we're in the forefront of changing the agrarian movement. We're just setting that up at Serenbe. We're changing the farm system in the entire Chat Hills country so that we're growing more food. Locally, we need to have a regional ag system. You know, in the 50s, I know Georgia, we produced 80% of what we ate. Today, it's about 16%. 65% of our fertilizers that's going into our dirt, that's growing our food, is coming from Russia and Ukraine. We have allowed our food system to turn in one of the most vulnerable situations. If you think the pandemic was bad, wait until there is a foodborne disease and we figure out how much of our food is coming from foreign governments. And what does it cost you? How much petroleum are you paying for the food on the shelves? You know, one of our local ranchers has been growing cattle forever, but now, you know, they grow them to a certain point, then they send them out back west, then to another place to be butchered, then they're separated and mixed with who knows. My goodness, that piece of meat has traveled around the country before it gets back home, where it grew up about 10 miles from us. That is not a workable system. What's more, if you look at a graph between what we spent on food in 1950, and we have just been value engineering our food so it's cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And while we've been doing that, our food costs or our health care is going the exact reverse of our GDP. And for the first time in civilization, we have obesity and malnutrition in the same body. Think about that a minute. We are presenting to the American people empty nutrition, high-caloried food. And we, as a society, can't afford this because the graphs are going that way, and we've got to change it. So this is the entire ag system. It isn't just the boutique farms, it's stepping into the entire ag system. And we are that think tank for that. This is why I'm getting on a plane in the morning, headed out to the National Farmland Trust. If you, those that saw Common Ground, you saw the where we testified at Congress. We set that happened from a meeting at Serenbe, that we set that up. And so this is fun to be in the middle of some of these things where we're really changing things. Lots to do, y'all.
Thank you so much, Steve Nygren. Thank you so much. We are sorry that Steve will not be with us for the rest of the conference, so if you want to have a little confab or talk with him, you can do that before we adjourn today at 5 o'clock.
And by the way, I wanted to show you that if you want to do a deep dive into what we've done, Serenbe Stories is a podcast that takes you from the history. Then this is the Serenbe webpage. Good Housekeeping named us one of the new top small towns in America. And then on this side is the Biophilic Solutions, and that is the Biophilic Institute we set up. And so we have a lot going on. Within the Serenbe webpage, you can go to the Art Farm, which is all of our art programming. We just closed with a Broadway show. We have now a modern ballet coming in, and then an entire classical music series. So we plan to come and take advantage of a lot of those things, plus all the restaurants.